I should say from the outset that I'm going to agree with pretty much everything Tim has said. So I've decided that Tim and I should form a new political party and save the country. We've been asked this morning to give our perspectives on growth, prosperity and well-being, and I'm going to touch on three themes to do it. I'm going to explain why I think the objectives of economic growth, national prosperity and community well-being are essentially interconnected if growth is well managed. And I go to Tim's point about the alternative needs to be very clear to the community. I want to talk about some goals and measures that might help Australia progress and track social and economic progress. And I want to share some early thinking we've been doing at the Business Council about the things we need to get right in the short to medium term for us to become a truly exceptional country. As part of our 30th year anniversary next year, we decided to have a crack at developing a long-term economic vision for Australia that describes what well-managed growth might look like. And an overarching goal we've set for this is enduring prosperity for all Australians. Now, we understand that people will question our authority to take on a task like this, and we're clearly not a substitute for government if we can't tell political parties what to do. But we do have an enormous stake in the nation's well-being, enormous skin in the game, not because of our shareholders and our employees, but because we are supporting national and enduring prosperity. And I want to take the opportunity today to quickly talk about what that vision might look like and to invite you to participate with us in developing it, because we absolutely know that this cannot be a conversation only between elites. The context of this symposium is the best place for me to start. I stand here as living, breathing proof of the success of Gough Whitlam's policies. I grew up with parents who fell on hard times and struggled to make ends meet, and I wouldn't have had the safety net of public housing without his government. I wouldn't have gone to university without his government. And I and many other people, as a result, would not have experienced the social mobility that I have that can be attributed to many of the policies he initiated. The national transformation overseen by Whitlam had both social and economic consequences, and I believe its enduring value remains largely unquestioned. But when we reflect back, surely the lesson from Whitlam is, and for the lesson for Australian leaders today, is that if you don't match strong vision with sound economic performance and fiscal discipline, you limit how much can be achieved. There'll be different views on this in this room, and I, of course, wasn't asking those questions when I was a beneficiary of the Whitlam initiatives. But with the benefit of hindsight, it's fascinating to think of what might have been achieved, what Australia might look like today if the Whitlam government had developed and pursued an economic vision in parallel with its social vision. Imagine the level of ambition it would have afforded us as a country. Imagine the social progress we would have made. Which leads me to the point about growth providing the essential underpinning for allowing future generations the opportunity for prosperity and well-being that I've enjoyed all my life. Now, the global financial crisis has generated legitimate questions in many parts of the world about the pursuit of growth, who benefits from it and at what cost. And what I want to do this morning is restate the case for growth, not to be pursued for its own sake, but for the creation of enduring community prosperity and shared value. To achieve this kind of prosperity, we need to plan for well-managed growth, and I want to share some ideas for doing that. By and large, they build on what Australia has achieved pretty well over the last 50 years. But I think the time's come to recommit to a path that has served Australia well, to reflect on what growth has delivered and what it might deliver in the future, and to restate a vision for well-managed growth that does even better at making Australia an exceptional society. Creating a vision for well-managed growth has to be a vision that benefits all Australians and doesn't leave groups of people behind. So let me start by reflecting on what well-managed growth has delivered so far, and Tim's gone through some of these things. When people talk about 21 years of uninterrupted growth, it's important to think about what it actually means for people, for our environment, for our freedom and for our choices. Over the last 21 years, the amount of economic activity in Australia has doubled, and the amount of wealth created on a per capita basis has increased by almost 50%. I want to take superannuation as a particular example. Before the introduction of award superannuation in 1986, it's estimated then that fewer than half of all Australian individual workers were paid superannuation. Today, 9 out of 10 employees have super contributions paid into their super accounts. I use super as an example because it's been fundamental to helping us prepare for an ageing population. It's fundamental to helping people maintain choices throughout their lives, and it provides Australia with an extraordinary endowment. And it's a demonstration of our capacity in Australia to agree on a vision and make it happen. If we look where growth might take us over the next 21 years, we can aspire to lift our per capita wealth in real terms by another 50%. And we should aspire at the same time to do that while preserving our environment and our way of life. But if we think about the consequences of slowing growth, we have to imagine a world where incomes won't grow as fast, where unemployment will rise, and where there'll be less revenue for governments. That risk will come at a time when the cost of an ageing population is starting to rise, and it will present vastly more difficult sets of choices for future governments and future generations. There are people, many people sometimes I think here today, who believe it would be better to maintain the status quo rather than keep growing, given how good it is for most people in Australia right now. And that's, I think, a legitimate perspective for people to raise. But the reality is, in a competitive, globally connected world, you can't stand still and simply think you're going to preserve what you've got. Continued, well-managed growth, in my view, will be fundamental to continued prosperity. It's growth that gives us rising wages, growth that gives us choices, and growth that gives us a capacity to support our vital social safety net. And it's growth and prosperity that contributes to social cohesion. Now, in putting the case for growth, I know there are some important questions to be asked and answered about what growth looks like in the context of enduring prosperity and well-being. We must be talking about growth that's managed in a way that delivers shared value. And we need to recognise that traditional forms of wealth creation, physical capital, are changing. Let me quickly describe what we see as the fundamental principles of well-managed growth. These beliefs obviously reflect our philosophy as a business organisation and our belief in the role and responsibility of business in creating community prosperity. Some of these principles are open markets and the value of competition, a focus on productivity and lifting productive capacity, clear roles for governments and markets that play to their respective strengths, a focus on efficient regulation that doesn't stifle innovation and creativity, the efficient use of natural resources, maximum participation in the labour market. And we believe in a set of principles that go to fairness, to freedom of choice, to equality of opportunity and reward for effort. Tim's points about inequality are absolutely right. We cannot see a society where the generation of wealth and growth creates polarisation that creates entrenched disadvantage. And the Business Council, the ACTU and ACOS who are here today have agreed that we will work together to unravel and untap what is causing systemic inequality. We take these principles very seriously at the Business Council because we believe they are all essential ingredients to achieving that vision of enduring prosperity. So what will well-managed growth potentially deliver us in terms of the specific goals and measures for that kind of prosperity? A society which, in our view, we are able to compete globally in a connected world. Incomes rise with productivity and national wealth. Citizens are educated and skilled throughout the entirety of their lives. There is a fair and sustainable social safety net. Generations, groups and communities are not left behind. The efficient use of natural resources contributes to economic and social well-being. We can invest in research, innovation, create new forms of wealth. We can afford and maintain a quality health system. We can plan, prioritise and pay for infrastructure, and we can invest in the social fabric of society, our arts, our culture and our support. Now, it may surprise you that they are the goals that the Business Council wants to see underpinning that vision of enduring prosperity. And I can assure you that the conversations we have around the Business Council are about that kind of society, an aspirational, optimistic society. And of course, people will often say those kinds of goals are motherhood statements and they're hard to achieve, and they are, because they involve trade-offs. So the choice of measures for tracking progress become very important. In developing our vision, we want to have a conversation with a wide cross-section of Australia about how we might measure the enduring prosperity, how we might measure our progress in achieving those goals. We're thinking about 3 categories of measurement covering economic activity, how we measure social progress, and how we measure environmental sustainability and our natural assets. Importantly, these have to mean something to people and they have to be seen as working in tandem. Now, we've had a conversation this morning, a very useful one, about the use of traditional indicators like GDP growth, GDP per capita, income per capita. It's absolutely essential that we see those as enabling social and economic progress, not as goals and ends to themselves. So I agree with Robert about that. And we must explain that to people more fully. The second set of indicators, which are more important and I think will create more debate, are those indicators of social progress, which should fall out of well-managed growth. 3 measures obviously stand out for their importance: educational attainment, life expectancy and health status, and of course the distribution of income. But it is very important that we think about some of the broader indicators of social progress that Robert mentioned this morning. Turning to how we measure our stock of natural assets and environmental sustainability, I've long been an advocate for giving economic value to environmental assets, putting our stock and flow and utilisation of natural assets on the balance sheet. It's essential, I believe, for us to reframe the environmental sustainability debate outside the extreme green movement. It needs to be seen as a complement to growth and enduring prosperity, not in competition or in conflict with it. We also need, as part of that, to think about those early indicators that tell us how we're tracking. Youth employment is a good one. Are we creating quality jobs where we're transferring skills? Childhood obesity, which will erode all of the health gains that we're making technologically. So to sort of wrap up, did you tell me to wrap up? Yep. We need to start to take account of the big game changes. Our vision will try and do that. Technology, the digital economy, the rise of Asia and the emerging economies. And it's important in doing a vision like this that we not try and write an economic manifesto for the next 30 years, and we're not seeking to do that. What we're seeking to do is to think about what we aspire to as a nation, consider what we're up against, and decide what can be done now to ensure that the next generation lives a better life than ours. There's a lot of factors we can't control, but the challenge is not to make too many wrong choices, not to imagine we can go backwards, not to get stuck in doing nothing, and to work out what each sector should do and the role they should play in managing change. So this means we need to focus very clearly on the things we need to get right over the next 5 years to lock in prosperity for the next 30, and I'll do these quickly. We think there are 8 core areas, and there'll be debate about this. The first is unleashing innovation. Robert, one of the things you didn't talk about in your 12 things, and I think the kind of limits to growth debate always misses, is innovation, technology, and the capacity to unleash that innovation. The second is to realise the potential of people and workplaces, to strengthen the integrity of our governance and institutions, to plan for population growth, cities and infrastructure, to put tax and fiscal policy on a sustainable footing, to embrace foreign investment and get our engagement with the world economy right, particularly in Asia, to deal with the structural changes happening in Australia's financial markets, and to reinvigorate our energy markets. And we'll be working very closely with a broad cross-section of the community over the next 6 to 12 months to make sure that we actually build some consensus around the things that we need to get right, and in particular the specific actions we need to take to provide a roadmap for the future. So to finish, more than at any other time in our history, our endowment of natural resources, our human capital, our adjacency to Asia, and our capacity to adapt and innovate have given us the chance to achieve the vision I've talked about today on our own terms. But it's not going to happen on autopilot, and it's important that we work harder together to get these things. Without that shared recognition and commitment, we'll not convince the community of the importance of growth for delivering the intergenerational mobility we're so proud of. And as a consequence, governments will continue to delay making the policy changes that need to be made to create enduring national prosperity. Thank you.